The Algonquin, like the Gresham, was cut in two, some 40 feet aft, TP make passage IO the Atlantic during the Spanish-American War. For many years she was ported in San Juan, Puerto Rico. The Androscoggin was the service's first vessel purposely built for icebreaking along the coast of New England. Note the curvature of her stem at the waterline, indicating her cutaway icebreaker bow. She was the last major wooden hull cutter. The tug Arcata was active on Puget Sound, where she made significant captures of rum runners. One of her would-be evaders is shown here. The cutter Bear, a legend in her own time, spent over 40 years as the mainstay of the Bering Sea Patrol. Her hull was strengthened for ice operations, including iron plating on her stem. The Bear was lost in 1963, while she was being towed to California. The cutter Boutwell was built for the southern coasts. She had a light draft and twin screws. Note aft cabin structure. The Chase was the first of several training vessels in the service. She was designed by Captain J. H. Merriman of the Revenue Service. She was admired for her sharp lines and speed. The Corwin became a veteran on the Bering Sea Patrol, along with the more famous Bear. She continued in the Bering Sea Patrol after her sail.
The Delaware, later renamed the Louis McLean, had been very active as part of the North Atlantic blockading squadron during the Civil War. She was one of many vessels obtained by the Revenue Service from the Navy at the war's end. She remained in service until the turn of the century.
The Dexter spent most of her career on Long Island Sound. The Dix, formerly the Wilderness, was stationed on the Gulf. She retained her name after sale in 1891. This appears to be a photo taken after her Revenue Service, given the extent of her cabin structure. The 1883 Fessenden was a new iron vessel, replacing the wooden 1865 vessel of the same name. She retained the original machinery and cruised the Great Lakes until 1903. The Gallatin was one of several testbed vessels during the 1870s. She was fitted with a patent steering propeller, which proved unsuccessful. Later her simple engine was replaced by compound cylinders. The Galveston, shown here early in her career, with clipper bow and eagle figurehead. Renamed the Apache in 1904. Her original machinery had one cylinder per screw. By 1904 she was nearly unrecognizable. The Grant, one of the few three-masted cutters, also had an iron hull. She served on the Atlantic and Pacific and was the first cutter to use wireless telegraphy, radio, in 1903. The cutter Gresham was first of several given bow torpedo tubes, indicating the naval auxiliary role of these vessels. Canadians accused the United States of violating the peace accord on the Great Lakes. A later rebuild removed the tubes.
The Hamilton, sister to the Gallatin, is shown fitted for service in the Spanish-American War. Although 27 years old, she saw combat during the conflict.
The training vessel Itasca. Formerly the three-masted naval vessel Bancroft. She served in revenue cutter service until 1922. One of her 6-pounders may be in the open port under her forecastle. The Johnson, one of several side-wheeler cutters built for the Great Lakes. She had single-cylinder walking beam machinery and light draft. These vessels were laid up during winter months. The Kankakee and sister vessel, the Yokona, were typical riverboat designs, shallow draft steel hull and wooden cabin structures. These characteristics were needed for inland river operations. The Lincoln was only in service until 1874 but made 3 cruises to the newly purchased Alaskan Territory. On the first cruise, she carried the authority to establish an American seat of government in the territory. The cutter Mahoning, renamed the Levi Woodbury. Longest lasting of the screw-propelled vessels built in the Civil War. This photo may have been taken before she was lengthened in 1868. Note the unusual brig rig. Most of this class were sold after the war. The Manning, composite hull sister to the Gresham. In later years, her bulwarks and sailing rig were reduced. The McCulloch was the largest of the new breed of cutters and the only one given 3 masts. There were some speculations that she was intended to replace the Bear in ice operations. Note torpedo tube on her bow. Her first service was with Admiral Dewey at Manila Bay, protecting his storeships. She was the first cutter to assume her duties via the Suez Canal. Pictured is the ill-fated Miami. Renamed the Tamp. She was lost to a U-boat torpedo in 1918 and there were no survivors. She was the second largest naval loss of World War I, after the Collier Cyclops. The Mohawk was nearly identical to the Algonquin and the Onondaga except that she had no torpedo tube forward. Victim of an unknown steamer while on escort duty, she was the service's second accidental loss of World War I. Officially the LM Morrill, this cutter was iron-hulled with compound engines. In 1917 she was on hand and quickly lent assistance during the Mount Blanc disaster at Halifax, Nova Scotia. The Nunivak was a wooden stern-wheel riverboat built for the Yukon River. Her shallow hull was severely strained on the bow en route to Alaska, and her career was short. The Ossipee was built with a hull strengthened for ice breaking and sufficient freeboard for good seakeeping. The design was successful enough to warrant repetition in the 165-foot A-class cutters of the 1930s. The Pamlico made her home in the shallow waters of the North Carolina Sounds, where she remained nearly 40 years. The Perry was another iron-hulled replacement for a wooden cutter of the Civil War era. Despite advances in compound engines, the new Perry was given simple single-expansion machinery. The Rush, a replacement for the earlier Rush of 1874, again had a wooden hull, but she was given compound machinery. She was active on the Bering Sea Patrol. The Seminole was smaller, lighter draft version of the Algonquin. She was stationed off the southern coast and then on the Great Lakes. Shown here the Tahoma, pictured on right, and her semi-sister, the Yamacraw. Probably photographed shortly after completion. The flush-deck Tahoma had greater displacement and draft. The Yamacraw, except during World War I, was a fixture on the Savannah, Georgia station. The Seneca was designed specifically for removing or destroying derelict vessels endangering sea lanes. She thus joined the growing ranks of seagoing cutters. She was the first Coast Guard vessel on the International Ice Patrol, instituted after the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. Shown here the Tampa, of the 240-foot cutter class, showing her counter stern and plumb bow, features superseded by the flared stem and cruiser stern of the 250-foot Lake class of the late 1920s. The Tampa assisted in taking survivors from the burning ship Moreau Castle in 1934. The Thetis, like the Bear, was a wooden-hulled sealer, and both were in Alaskan waters. The Thetis was bark-rigged with funnel aft of the main mast, unlike the Bear's barkentine rig with funnel forward of the main mast. Note the double topsail rig. The Tuscarora was smaller than the Seminole and dispensed with the quarterdeck. As with other cutters on the Great Lakes, she was laid up in winter. She also served on the East Coast during World War I and Prohibition. The Tybee was a steel-hulled launch, permanently stationed at Savannah, Georgia, for over 30 years. The Wyndham was the service's first truly modern cruising cutter, with steel hull, triple expansion machinery, and watertight compartmentation. These features placed revenue service vessels on a par technologically with their Navy counterparts. Visually, the Wyndham and the Winona bear some resemblance, however, the latter's stem was vertical and her shorter length is obvious in broadside views. The Winona cruised both Gulf and South Atlantic waters. She had twin screws and triple expansion engines, which were common by the 1890s. She had compound machinery.